Hello to everybody, this is Stefano, Cardinal Mazarin from Italy. Welcome to our stream. Today we are with our main guest, that is Steve LeVine from US. I will introduce him soon, and we have as our guest Jan Newworldecon. Our mainstream today, it will be focused about the Caspian and all the Central Asia, about geopolitics, about energy. So I'm collecting all the news that you want to ask to him, and we will try to make a panel that will be as fluid as possible, with a question and answer panel and a little bit of introduction about this argument. So a little introduction that I will give to you about Steve. Steve LeVine was a foreign correspondent in the Caucasus and the Central Asia for 11 years. Worked for Wall Street Journal, and before it was for the New York Times, Financial Times and Newsweek. He wrote 3 books, but I will be focused on one, that is The Oil and the Glory. And it was a BusinessWeek magazine top 10 books for that year. So this book was very interesting for me. I catch him and this book because I was interested, especially in Turkmenistan. That was an argument that is very, very poor in acknowledgement, especially in the West. I talk about Italy and Southern Europe, but Turkmenistan, it's very difficult to find any information about it. And in this book, there is a huge chapter about this argument. So I will start collecting all the news. I will give a stand for a little introduction of Steve, if he can say something to the public. And then anything that you want to ask, we will talk and we will discuss about it. I already collected 2-3 questions before, so don't be shy and ask whatever you want. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Stefano, and thanks, Ian, for being here. I haven't talked about the oil and the glory or the region in a long time, but as Stefano said, I was a journalist, a foreign correspondent based in the Caucasus and Central Asia through the 90s and the early 2000s, and it has, just to frame this in a way that's relevant now. First thing, just 30 seconds. What is the Caucasus and Central Asia? When you look at the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, those 8 republics that belt underneath Russia, with the Caspian Sea at the center. That's Georgia and Armenia, Azerbaijan on one side, and all those countries ending with the word "stands" on the east side. So the West, the United States, when the Soviet Union broke up, embraced and took a special relationship with these countries. The goal of this was, the idea was, Russia at that time was prostrate. It was weak. Its economy was in shambles, but it was assumed that sooner or later, after a few years, Russia would get back on its feet, and it would attempt to march back to take control of the 14 other republics that made up the Soviet Union in one way or another. And the United States and the rest of NATO tried to put together a policy that would preclude that. In Europe, that policy was NATO expansion. Make all of those, or as many of those countries as you could, where Russia had power, make them independent, make them members of a Western military alliance. But the countries in the Caucasus and Central Asia were too far away from NATO, and so couldn't have that kind of a relationship. Instead, the way that the West was going to bolster those countries and try to make them immune to a revanchist Russia was oil and natural gas, and specifically it was to build oil and natural gas pipelines, not touching Russian soil, leading from the stands, from the Caucasus to the west, to Turkey, and thereby provide them the economic wherewithal to withstand Russia. And so you had the construction of these pipelines, and the name for this kind of politics, this was fought by Russia, was pipeline politics. And you can see this is relevant today, right? Because what's happened is exactly what was forecast back then. Russia has invaded one of these countries, Ukraine, and one of its main instruments for applying its power is natural gas pipelines. Two natural gas pipelines: Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, leading from Russia into Europe. And so history is circular. Just to close out the part on Central Asia, the Russia, as we know, through Putin, has gotten back on its feet. It is an activist Russia, applying its pressure in its traditional colonial lands. That is, its Slavic neighbors, it's the Caucasus, it's Central Asia, and the countries are the pipeline, the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, the main oil pipeline, which was the center of U.S. policy. It's shipping oil still, but its power as an instrument of a projection of U.S. influence and of independence for those republics is much weakened. And one last point on this: when this policy was being erected and executed, Central Asia opted out. Right, it was the Caucasus that connected itself to the West, and Central Asia, put its lot in with Russia and built its main oil and natural gas lines through Russia. Now, what's happened now? Russia has shut down that pipeline. That's called the CPC pipeline. And what you're seeing now is Kazakhstan trying to resurrect a relationship so that it can continue to ship its oil across the Caspian into Azerbaijan and across. And this is important. I realize now that the politics that I'm talking about are much changed, because the issue of climate change didn't really come into the picture then. But what we're talking about is national sovereignty. We're talking about these countries being able to act on their own 2 feet and not be subject to the whims of Russia. I'm gonna stop right there, Stefano, and we can go forward any way you want.
Yes. So I'm collecting the question, and I'm starting with the first. Okay. This one, it's a question about geopolitics. How can the area of the Caspian Sea be configured from a geopolitical and energy point of view during this USA-Russia confrontation with China that is not only watching. The question is about, let's say that not only from the western part of the Caspian Sea, but also the eastern part, about Turkmenistan and the part that it could be more connected with China. What is your point of view in what could change in Central Asia in the next years with this, let's say, directly US-China confrontation? Because in our opinion, Russia, it's not a proxy, but it's not the main deal. The main deal could be the direct confrontation between China and US. Your point of view.
Yeah, it's hard to understand now, but at the time we're talking about, this area, what was, I mean, it was one of the 2 or 3 biggest geopolitical stories in the world, right? The confrontation between the United States and Russia on the Caspian Sea was one of the 2 or 3 top U.S. policies. It was, you know, a huge thing, and like what you just said, that's gone now, right? It's receded. It doesn't have the same role. Stefano, are you looking for how local the local politics might change? Where do you want to take this?
No, it's what could change about the international relationship of these states. Let's say, for example, it's unclear about what Kazakhstan is making now. Like if they want to be a little bit in a different, let's say, international relationship with other states and not so direct with Russia, like Belarus, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I could say some radical things which I think are true, and I will. But let me say first that these states are really stuck in a very difficult position because they're crammed between Afghanistan, Iran, China, and Russia. And so how do you balance that out, right? If you're Kazakhstan, let's say, and you want to leverage something to make Putin keep his distance, with whom would that be, right? Because Putin has cozied up to Xi, the leader of China. He's cozied up to Iran, and so like if Kazakhstan, you know, wanted to say to Putin, you know, F you, we're going to build our pipeline into China. You know, we're going to use China. Well, China is friendly with Putin. You know, it wouldn't want that. It wouldn't want to make. She would not want to make Putin angry over Kazakhstan. It's not big enough. Let me say that Kazakhstan is, in terms of economics, is in a very good position, right? It not only has oil, as all of these metals and minerals, for example, that the electric vehicle world is seeking, that are in such a supply shortage around the world. Kazakhstan has all this. It has lithium, for example, and so it's going to be okay economically. But one thing that's interesting is that you've seen that over the last 2-3 months, this very surprising thing has happened. Nursultan Nazarbayev, the longtime dictator, Kazakhstan dictator, 20 years, 25 years, has been shunted aside, and no one has yet done the reporting to explain how that happened. Right? So I'm waiting for someone to do that, and maybe someone who's on this broadcast plans to do that or will do it. But the new leader, right? His former foreign minister Takayev is the new president. He's standing up to Putin, and I know we don't understand how and why, but he has said he's not going to support Russia regarding its invasion of Ukraine, and he's been outspoken and critical. But the thing that I was saying is one thing that could radically change the geopolitics in that region is if the states surrounding Russia, and that includes Kazakhstan, the stands, right? And so including Uzbekistan too, because they're the only one with a real army on the Central Asia side, but also on the Caucasus side, invaded Russia. So Russia suddenly has wars on all of its borders, right? On all of its surrounding borders, and this of course, I started out by saying it's a radical solution, and I think it is. But what answer is there? What answer is there to Russia choosing to pick off a weak neighbor and invade that country and basically say, if you want to be fine, if you want to be free of us, but we're going to destroy you, and so you can be free in this destroyed country. This was exactly the scenario that played out in the 90s. That was the whole reason for U.S. strategy for pipeline politics.
But Steve, like in your opinion, what was the difference at that time, at the end of the 80s, that allowed, for example, Azerbaijan to make the agreement with Georgia and Turkey to make the pipeline? Like the main difference, it was about the weakness of the collapsing Soviet Union.
Yeah. So the thing that allowed that to take place was that Russia was super weak. Russia was on its back. It couldn't do anything. It was at the mercy of international banks, of international businesses, and it was in chaos. So this freed up those 8 republics: Azerbaijan and Georgia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, to do their own thing, to sign their own their own deals. It freed up business people from around the world, companies from around the world, to flock into these countries to try to get pieces of these deals to try to create the geopolitics, the business that we're talking about. All of that was made possible because Russia wasn't a player. Russia threatened, right? When the oil deal was signed in Azerbaijan in 1994, Russia threatened to send its Caspian Sea fleet against the threat was any infrastructure built offshore in the Caspian off Azerbaijan is a potential target for the Russian Navy. They threatened to shell these oil derricks. The Azeris called their bluff and said, we're going to do it anyway. But that sort of, I think today, like, that kind of a deal wouldn't happen today, right? If oil was being developed today offshore Azerbaijan for the first time, and Russia opposed it, and Putin a very different character from Boris Yeltsin, threatened his navy against oil installations, I don't think anyone would build anything. I mean, they would be crazy to.
So I have a follow-up question.
Jan, I wanted to give you the word. So Jan, I have a question for you, Steve, and I'm still collecting the questions. I have many of them already collected. If anybody wants to do it, please write on YouTube comments, and I will give it to the stand. Jan, the word is yours.
So, specifically regarding Kazakhstan, because you make a good point, and it's very interesting what's going on there right now, especially with the current president or prime minister. I'm not sure. That's kind of at least visibly standing up to Putin. And my question is like this more of like an act in order to like consolidate the population and get them on board with something, like to find something in common, because as we know, Kazakhstan's a pretty weak country right now. Geographically, it's very weak. Like in terms of standing up to a Russian invasion, it probably would hold out a lot less longer than Ukraine would. I mean, you have most of their population is strung out in like basically a ring around the country, and I think like half of like the northern part populated areas is ethnic Russians, right? And this thing with oil, they're talking about building a new pipeline under the Caspian Sea. So it's nothing that can be done anytime soon, right? Like this, building a pipeline like that is probably going to take years, right? And you're going to have someone that's like companies that are technically superior that can build these pipelines like on the ocean bed. They're probably not going to want to operate in this area because there's a war going on in Ukraine. It's going to be difficult to get financing. The other factor of that is if they do get their oil to Baku, it's then shipped either through a pipeline that goes through Georgia close to South Ossetia, which is Russian occupied territory, or you have the pipeline that goes north from Baku through Russia and terminates at Novorossiysk. So even if the Kazakh crude doesn't end up going that way, Russia could potentially shut that pipeline down for the Azeris, so they might not want to risk it. So like, what do you think the likelihood is that a deal like this actually happens? Like, do you think that basically the Kazakh premier is like full of it? Or do you think he's like, doing this for internal political reasons? What do you think?
Well, this is a good question. So first, so just a point on the pipelines out of Baku. So the pipeline Baku Supsa does come very close to South Ossetia, but Baku Jehan does not. Right? You've got a lot of distance, and so that part doesn't trouble me. But the part that you raised about the undersea Caspian pipeline, I don't see how that can happen. Right? But for the very reasons you state, who's going to ensure, who's going to finance, who's going to build a pipeline that Russia is certain to oppose?
Right.
And so to me, I don't know, like it looks like they would be, in terms of shipping oil from Kazakhstan trans-Caspian, they would be stuck with the method that they used during the 90s, and that's shipping on ships, right? From Akhtau across to Baku, and then sticking it into the pipeline there. Now about Tokayev, the president, right? The president. I don't think it's an act, but it is surprising. Tokayev, I know Tokayev, I've met him, and he's a functionary, right? He spent all of these years, right? He's a very, very erudite man, a fluent Chinese speaker, a fluent English speaker, a world-class diplomat. He knows how to operate on the world stage, but he's never been someone who's operated geopolitically in the way that he is now, or the way Nazarbayev did. Nazarbayev was a great nationalist, right? A Kazakh nationalist. So you're right that Tokayev is addressing the domestic audience, but he also, so Nazarbayev never threatened Russia the way that Tokayev has, and gone as far, chin out, the way that Tokayev has. And I'm puzzled, right? Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Right? How, where was this guy a year or 2 years ago? Right? This personality that he's suddenly exhibiting. But bottom line, there's a domestic component, but who doesn't have why is Putin behaving the way he's behaving? Right? I mean, that's also domestic. And so that doesn't take anything away from what Tokayev is doing. Honestly, like the various parts of what Tokayev is all about, how he sidelined Nazarbayev, what his actual plan is for keeping Kazakhstan on its feet. How is he going to continue to ship? It's over 1 million barrels a day, right? How is he going to continue to ship that volume of oil when he was shipping, when they were shipping oil trans-Caspian during the 90s? It was a couple 100,000 barrels a day, right? I mean, this is, much more. And the pipeline into China is just 150,000 barrels a day. Where are the other 600, 800,000 barrels a day going to go? I guess a wild card in this is the foreign oil companies, right? So who are those oil companies? Exxon, Chevron. These are not children. These are tough players, and so maybe their muscle can be brought to bear. But it's a tough, Ian. It's a tough spot. It's a super tough spot, and I don't know. I don't see how you get those, the bulk of that oil out of the country.
Yeah, I think probably the more important oil operators in this particular situation are probably like Schlumberger and Halliburton and different technical companies like that do some of like the drilling and the pipeline work, right? Like that's probably who's more important. Or do you think that it, like Exxon or like a big international players, like who they would need?
Well, so Schlumberger and Halliburton do everyone has farmed out their actual exploration departments and their work to the oil service companies, and Baker also. But when it comes to making the deals, to financing the deals, it's the oil companies who do that. They're the ones who have that talent, and then they hire out these companies. The other thing that can work here is corruption, right? I mean, so for all of these years, so Ukraine and Russia have been at odds almost from the beginning of the Soviet breakup. Turkmen natural gas has been shipped through Ukraine for years, right? And how has that natural gas been able to ship through? Well, everyone has gotten paid off, right? And so the Turkmen people, the real power brokers behind the scenes, the Russian Gazprom, right? Those guys behind the scenes, and Ukraine's gas company, right? Those oligarchs, all of the wheels are greased, so the natural gas ends up going. So you could find a scenario like that, right, where you
Right.
get the right oligarchs paid off. But as I'm speaking, Putin, he's the king of the oligarchs, and so his politics, would he let that happen? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he wants to be Peter the Great. He sees himself as Peter the Great. He sees the war in Ukraine and whatever outcome he truly sees there. We don't know what Putin really wants, but whatever that is, it's part of this this whole Peter the Great syndrome. And he would, I would think that he would be very difficult. It would be very difficult to get that kind of a deal past him.
Right.
Okay, so thank you, Jan. Thank you, Steve, for the answer. I wanted to put some questions from the public. Okay, we have some questions from, I think, Netherlands. Do the Americans really want to see countries in Europe militarize and spend more on defense? Or would they get nervous once European countries actually do? I don't know what US really wants.
Yeah, I do think that the US would like to see European countries spend more and build themselves up. As far as what the US wants, I don't have to tell you that I'm not sure that the U.S. knows what it wants. What kind of political chaos is going on here. But domestic politics, Ukraine is extremely popular domestically. Right? I mean, everyone is flying Ukrainian flags. Ukrainian flags are posted in front of buildings, stadiums, all kinds of infrastructure, and so so Biden and Congress, right, whatever party you're in, are obliged to to back Ukraine by domestic politics. Now, thinking of it on a larger a larger playing ground, it is smart geopolitics. It's smart politics to back Ukraine. It is a dangerous geopolitics that Russia thinks it can invade its neighbors to get its way, and does this. That's not an invented idea. It's not a ideological idea, and so it's the right in my view. It's the right policy. In my view, NATO expansion was the right policy. Pipeline politics was the right policy. It was correct. It's the thinking behind it was correct. Where just parenthetically, it probably didn't need to to expand into Ukraine and into Georgia, or to say that it was going to just because it's wrong for another country to dictate another country's geopolitics. That's like an ideal, and it doesn't mean that's that's how the world really works. But the concept of NATO expansion up to those countries, I think, was correct. How far, one of the questions that's raised is how far will the US, will Europe continue to back Ukraine? I think the US will continue to back Ukraine regardless of who's in power here. I do wonder, and maybe Ian, or maybe you, Stefano, maybe you want to weigh in on what you think Europe will do.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely an interesting question in terms of especially the part about like mobilization of European countries. And I do think that it's kind of an underestimated factor, right? Like, of course, the U.S. wants Germany and Poland and some of these nations to like build up their forces and manufacture some more equipment, so it's not just us taking on the load with like some of these things with NATO. I mean, it was the whole thing with Donald Trump, right? It was like not everyone is paying their way in NATO, and I mean. I'm sure the audience was alive for the last 4 years, so you guys know. But inside of Europe, I think that there probably will be a little bit of nervous behavior going on if Germany really decides to like mobilize to the point that one of my favorite quotes from one of Peter Zion's books is the factories in Germany right now look very Volkswagen-y, but if times start getting hard, they can start looking very Panzery real quick, and that could make a lot of countries around Europe pretty nervous. Germany is not very well liked around Europe. I mean, you're seeing this now, like with the way that the gas politics is going on, and of course, some viewers probably remember back in like 2008 and 2009. When the financial crash happened and it hit Europe really hard, and it hit Southern Europe extremely hard, and Greece was in need of a bailout, and there was a lot of nasty rhetoric coming from Germany about Greece not being responsible and like they weren't going to pay for their mistakes, and same thing with Italy and Spain. And then now you have the reverse situation where you have Ursula von der Leyen at the EU saying things like, Europe needs to sign on to an agreement to reduce gas by 15%. That way, the Germany will be better off. And basically, you have all of Southern Europe saying, go screw yourself. Essentially, like Spain and Portugal leading the way on that. Greece, essentially saying we're not going to sign up to a deal. There were some rather clapbackish comments made by Spain in particular in terms of that deal. So I mean, I think there's a bit more resentment in the EU for Germany than a lot of people realize, especially in America. I mean, I'm not in the EU, so I can't speak to that. I can't say that it's nothing that they can't get around, that like they can't work out. They very well might be able to work it out, but I imagine that a stronger Germany militarily would probably make some people nervous. And Steve, in terms of NATO expansion, I do have a quick question for you. Just want to see how you feel. Are you familiar with the opinions of John Mearsheimer? And if you are you what do you think of his take on, say, not particularly like NATO expansion in general, but the idea to expand or announce an expansion into Ukraine or Georgia? Because I mean, I understand his point very well. There's some things I agree with. There's some things I don't agree with. But I do very much see his point on, to paraphrase, leading Ukraine down the primrose path. While it might be a good idea geopolitically for the U.S. to pursue these policies, it was inevitably always going to lead to the destruction of Ukraine. It was something that Russia was never going to tolerate, and they were always going to try to stop. So in terms of that, like, what do you think of that opinion?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question. So just to end with the, with a conclusion, but explain myself. I do think again that NATO expansion should have stopped. Meaning discussion of NATO, but NATO did not expand into Ukraine. It did not expand into. It never went anywhere into Georgia. It was discussion, but it shouldn't have been. It didn't need to be, and it's for the reasons that Mearsheimer states, and not just him. George Kennan also said this. Right? A number of leading thinkers talked about provoking Russia. That in the end it would end in tears. But what this group of thinkers say, they also opposed pipeline politics. They oppose all of the NATO expansion, and I just so Brzezinski, I rely on Brzezinski for my own thinking on this, and it is that Russia is historically an expansionist country. Okay, fine. It expanded at the same time the United States was expanding across the West. Russia was expanding across Siberia, all the way to the Pacific, but it also expanded in the 19th century into the Caucasus and Central Asia, and post World War II into Europe, into the Baltics and into Europe. And I just think that it's almost blind. It's blind. It's not realistic, and it's also immoral to say, well, it really upsets Russia that it can't absorb its neighbors, so we need to go along with that. I don't think that's correct. And I also think that it's dangerous. It's dangerous when that's considered okay. It won't stop there, right? You turned a blind eye to one country doing that. Does that mean that's the only part of the world in which a country like Russia will think that it's okay to do that? It's chaos. And so remember, right? 2008, Russia also invaded Georgia, right? It bombed the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline. It's suspected of bombing. I think it did in Turkey, right? In Georgia, in Turkey, in 2008 to stop the flow of oil. It has stopped the flow of oil from Kazakhstan, and so you've got a military war, you've got an economic war. These are that's realism, that's reality, and so how does the question is, how do you behave in that kind of world? I do want to say that oil is a fungible commodity, and natural gas increasingly is. And so what does that mean? It means that oil can move anywhere in the world. There's a fixed volume at any time of oil demand. And so where that oil is demanded, it will go. If it's cut off, oil is cut off to Europe. It's not like there's an endless appetite for oil elsewhere in the world where that can go. So Europe won't have that Russian oil, but that oil, that Russian oil that was going to Europe will go to satisfy the appetite someplace else, and the oil that was going to that someplace else will be available for Europe to buy. And it's the same with the natural gas. There will be an adjustment period because it was pipelines that was that were transporting that natural gas to Europe. There will be a period in which other conveyances need to be built, to deliver that natural gas. But Europe will have, within 2-3 years, all the natural gas that it wants to buy, and oil as well. It'll be a balanced market.
Steve, I wanted only to post another slide that we already talked about it in previous streams, and like your book was one of my sources to study more about this, the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, with TAP that finally arrived in Italy, southern Italy, and whatever. My personal point of view, and I will answer to your question about the European point of view of, for example, the increasing spending of Germany and whatever. My point of view is that I think Italy will have a strategical position in the next policy about an European Union gas and energy policy, because the hub from the north, from Germany, from Nord Stream, probably will move to south. We can see that from east, for example, from Azerbaijan, from the south, from Africa, Libya, Algeria, Nigeria, and whatever. And I think that a huge amount of new energy and new imports will be by GNL. Like, for example, now in Italy, we already we just bought 2 mobile ships for GNL. So, and we have already 3 plants. And what Jan said about Spain, Portugal, and Greece, it was very interesting, because these 3 countries are mainly completely independent by gas import, by pipeline, because they moved to GNL. So they don't care about Russia. They can import from Qatar or wherever they want. And there is a little bit of revenge of, let's say, the European Union politics of the last 15 years, because it was led by Germany. And we call it about the eagles from the north, not only Germany, Dutch, Germans, then Denmark, and whatever, because they were a little bit not flexible about taxes and business plans, and they called Southern Europe pigs. I don't know if you remember it. It was Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. So it was not a good name, pigs, not for Southern Europe. So this now, at the beginning, Jan, they didn't sign, but at the end they signed. So there was, because let's say from Southern Europe, we can shout a lot and whatever, but culturally we are more kind. So we agreed to help the poor Germany with the gas. And I think that at the point of the last streams, I think Italy already reached the goal for the storage of the gas that we wanted to achieve. The only problem in Europe, it's like the average, because the average storage of the gas for the winter, it's less than 70%. Italy, it's more, because we have more, let's say, import routes. Germany only 1. This is the main problem. Germany tied itself with Nord Streams. And the other big problem that I didn't know is that a lot of industries in Germany, like BASF, it's directly connected to the stream, not to the national pipeline. So they got gas directly from the Nord Stream. And BASF, I didn't know that they have one factory with 40,000 employees, that it's about 15 square kilometers, the factory. 40,000 people is working, and they got gas directly from Russia, not from the Germany pipeline. So it's very interesting that the Germany issues, and historically the relationship between Germany and Russia, is very complicated, because Russian bureaucracy, it's German. So Catherine the Great was German. It's it's very, and another thing that it's important to the public to understand is that we are still tied about the World War II results, because Italy and Germany, we have to remind that, for example, in Italy we have over 100 US installation military. So Germany also. I'm not talking about NATO. I'm talking only about US military. So unfortunately, we lost the war. So we are still like defeated countries of the Second World War, and the relationship with US, it's not every time peaceful. We can remember Sigonella and where the US army wanted to take some terrorists, and the Craxi government didn't agree, and so there is this famous image of the US army surrounding the Italian army and the other Italian army surrounding the US Navy SEALs. But generally, we have still two big bases in Northeast, in Vicenza, one in Pisa, one in southern Italy, that it's the naval plus the NATO bases. And I think that the situation in Italy will be temporary, let's say not stable to understand, because we will have the national election on 25th of September. Probably the government will go center-right. So we will have a movement, and it will be probably the first time where the government will be made with the first party that it's a right party, not a center-right. So it's something that, and it's interesting, because I think that the European Union policy is made mainly by three countries: Italy, Germany, and France. All the others are not so relevant in the budget and everything. So I have other questions for you, Steve. What are the pros and the pro and cons for Russia and China developing one belt road into the Central Asia, especially long term after the current crisis is over? China increasing influence in Central Asia.
You know, this has been going on a long time. It's not new. You know, the One Belt, in a way, you know, One Belt, One Road began in Central Asia, right? With the oil pipeline into Kazakhstan, so you know, Russia has been dealing with this. Let's see. 15 years, for at least 15 years, you know, they have a modus vivendi, right? China tells Russia gets political influence in Central Asia, and China gets economic influence. That's kind of the balance that China doesn't seek to have geopolitical influence there, you know, but it's not stoppable. It's not possible to stop China economically in Central Asia, and again, they're not trying to challenge. China's not trying to challenge Russia's dominant, you know, military and political dominance there.
So a question that I have for you, but only for the people that don't know the argument. So it's very interesting. Why is so important geopolitically the question if the Caspian Sea is a sea or a lake?
All right. So this is a very old, and as far as I know, by the way, Stefano, it's not settled. It's still.
I agree with you. It's not settled.
Yeah. Okay. I apologize. My cat keeps pestering me. But the so so there are laws, right? So there are international laws and treaties that go back hundreds of years involving bodies of water that are surrounded by multiple countries, and if the Caspian Sea, which doesn't have a connection to any other body of water, if it's viewed as a lake, then it has one outcome in terms of how those states govern, how they have to govern natural resources that are found underneath the seabed, and if it's a sea, you know, how it's governed, and it involves what's under the bed, how far from the shore does each of the states get to drill without asking. Basically, Russia wanted the right, wanted all of the states to have veto rights on any other state's right to drill in the sea, and this debate over sea or lake is at the heart of that debate, and you can see what they ended up doing was we don't care, we're going to drill anyway, right? But again, it was possible because Russia was weak.
But Steve, if I remember from your book, the main, let's say the main deal for the Russian energy policy, let's say the Russian point of view in the Soviet Union, was that you have to make all the flows of oil and gas pass through Russia before going out. Right. If I remember right. So this was the main deal for the Russian Socialist Republic, to have the control of the export of the oil. So not directly from Azerbaijan to West, but from Azerbaijan, mixing it with the Ural oil, if I remember, and then export through West. So probably also this one, the question about the Caspian Sea could be a problem if Turkmenistan will make a pipe directly to Baku and then could be accessible to the Western market without passing through Russia.
Yeah. Okay, but that's not sea or lake. That's just about control. That's right. So this was the grand Soviet policy. One of its instruments of control over the 15 republics is that no republic, apart from Russia, was economically independent. So all of the industries, there was no complete single industry, none, right? Steel, any kind of industrial, metal, but also textiles, all industries. There was, each of them would make a single component of a product and then ship it to another republic to be completed. And again, the idea was that everyone was dependent on Russia, and this washed over into oil. So all oil and natural gas, all pipelines went through Russia, and this gave Russia ultimate stranglehold on all of those republics. And so that was the rationale for pipeline politics. Let's build what you just described, for example, a natural gas pipeline from Turkmenistan across to Baku and on. But Stefano, why did Turkmenistan never go along with that? Why did Turkmenistan never build that pipeline? Right? Is it just plain corruption? Niyazov and after him Berdi Muhamedov, were they paid off? Were they just weak and couldn't stand up to Russia? Short-sighted, conservative, maybe all of these things put together, but that it's a crime. In my view, it's a crime that Kazakhstan also, so you can tell me that Turkmenistan never had leaders, super strong geopolitical leaders who could act on a world level, but Kazakhstan did. Right, Nazarbayev did, and he didn't do it either. He didn't build a Trans-Caspian pipeline when he could. the U.S. and Europe too. Remember BP and Italy, ENI, right?
And
ENI. All of these companies begged Niyazov, Berdimuhamedov, Nazarbayev, let's do they wouldn't do it. And now they're, okay, so we could say they're paying the price, but then again, we have this 2008, we can't forget 2008, where Russia bombed the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, which was a statement, okay, you think you have protection from the United States? Well, that's your protection.
Yeah, Steve, I repeated like in other streams that part of your chapter because it was very interesting for me. But let's say that I have ties also in Russia because let's say that I have relatives, like my wife is Russian, blah blah blah. So I went there many times. I went also in Moldova and in a lot of former Soviet Union republics, and it's very difficult for me, for people that don't know Russian mentality or former Soviet Union, to understand the way how a message is sent to you. Like that one of the bombing of the pipeline, from the people that don't understand the Russia way of speaking, also with this act, was only we missed the pipe. And it's not, but the reality was we know where the pipe is. The next time that will piss us off, we are able to blow it. So it's interesting because, as you said before, the other pipes is very next to the South Ossetia border, but actually it's under the Russian control. So I think that for many years, Europe, now there will be a lot of questions about it. I'm selecting. This is from DPA, that it's one of our main contributors. So we have to thanks for your question. He's from Singapore. He has a channel that is called Defense Politics Asia. So what is the really problem with Europe having good and friendly relationship with Russia and not have the Russian is the new rival, we need to suppress mentality?
Yeah. Okay. So this is it's a tricky question, right? Because it presupposes that there's an ideological reason for for picking on it. It suggests that Russia is a victim. So I think it's a false thesis. So Russia is not an invented rival, and it's not a like a reflex or a pre-existing religion or ideology. Hey, let's suppress Russia. So the West, the U.S. This goes back, right? This is Putin's labyrinth. The conflict between the West, the tension between the West and Russia, is 500 years old. Right? So when it goes back to Ivan the Terrible, right? When Ivan was friendly with Elizabeth, right? The Queen of England, Elizabeth I, and this terrified all the other kings and all the other royalty in the rest of Europe. What I'm saying right now is all in This is all diplomatic letters that were written at that time. This is all documented, and I documented in that book. But the idea was that Ivan was a challenge to Europe, to Christianity, basically, and so and Ivan, right? The Russians at that time were very upset, right? That they were not disrespected, picked on, treated as lesser, right? A lesser country, a lesser people, and so this theme victimization theme runs through the centuries, and so it's I don't know like what is at the root of it, but this conflict, I'm just saying, it's not something new. It's not something that the United States invented. Before the United States existed, long before the United States existed, this existed, this politics, and so now, so we should, the West, Europe, and the United States should cooperate with Russia when there are policies, issues on which there's common interests, and they're going to oppose each other. They're going to fight when there's something that divides them. But Russia, does have an instinct, an impulse. It has had an impulse in the Tsarist period, in the Soviet period, and now in the post-Soviet period of trying to shoulder itself into situations on the argument that it's being kept out, and kind of a victimization of policy that we're being mistreated, we're being disrespected, and then attempting to insert itself into politics by being a spoiler. Whatever you want, we want the opposite. So I guess just to close this out, there's nothing wrong. My answer to this question is there's nothing wrong with having really good relations with Russia. But then the question is, what does Russia want? What does Russia want? And then what, right? Politics is about a trade-off, right? So you give something and you get. So what does the West get from Russia in exchange for, going along with, whatever the latest Russian demand is? Anyway, that's it.
So
Steve,
I want to.
I think, Jan, I will give you a word. It's only like to say to you that we will have, only for our viewers, in the next weeks, I'm trying to planning about 2 streams for week, and we will have two speakers from Russia, one from Gimo University, one from Carnegie Institute. So we will have 2 different point of view. It will be interesting. I will ask to them your question, because it's interesting to understand also the scientific answer about your question, not only like the people level and the university level. Jan, if you want to ask something, and I will give better questions later.
Yes, thank you. I want to expand. I want you to expand a little bit on what you're saying about like the Russian victimization, and specifically, I think what a lot of people refer to, or what comes to mind, or maybe even perhaps a moment that made some people sympathetic to what Russia's position is currently, is there was an interview given by Putin. I believe very recently, maybe even since like December, where he revealed that in the 90s, he asked Bill Clinton if Russia could join NATO. And I'm not sure, this obviously, I don't think the U.S. has ever confirmed that this conversation ever happened, but they actually have asked several times in the past. Like once was shortly after World War II, and I think it wasn't like a serious attempt to join NATO. It was just like, let's see what they'll say. Obviously the West was already gearing up to confront Russia at that point. But Putin, in Russia's weak state, allegedly asked Bill Clinton to join NATO and really got the cold shoulder on it. And I think a lot of people look at that, if it is true, as being, either a huge mistake because you could have brought Russia into the club, or in essence, what Wyatt's question was like, no, we don't want you to join the club because you're the enemy, type thing. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, it's true. That's true. So I'm forgetting if it's in The Oil and the Glory or in Putin's Labyrinth, but I do.
It's in Putin Labyrinth.
Putin Labyrinth. Okay, so I do document that. Yeah. So from the I got that confirmed. The Russians told me that when I was researching that, and the U.S. side confirmed it. It was viewed as a what would Russia's role be in NATO, right? So that the idea is that Russia's policies, how it would vote in NATO, right? You need unanimous approval of everything, right? Every state has to approve almost every move, and so Russia was viewed as a spoiler, right? So you would let right. So on its face, right, it said, yeah, let's bring Russia in, and then suddenly we can all be friends. But then questions were raised. How? So, for example, in 1999, when NATO decided to act against Milosevic in Serbia, there would not have been a NATO action against Milosevic in defense of Kosovo, and to today, right? Why Putin defended the invasion of Georgia based on NATO's bombing of Kosovo, and so that's why, and so I was there. I was in Albania for the Kosovo thing, and I remember, possibly you guys both opposed the the action there. A lot of people did. I didn't. I thought Milosevic needed to be stopped, and that war, that whole the Yugoslav war. There's a lot of aggression, and it was something that the West needed to stand up to long before it did. It was late. In my view, it was late.
Yeah, I agree. The Balkans were on the brink of disaster. Honestly, I think I defer a little bit in this situation. I think that it was probably necessary to stop what was going on in Bosnia. I'm not sure how much I agree with the intervention in Kosovo. I'm not too familiar. I mean, I wasn't there, obviously, and I was very young at the time. But just like my reading on it and my understanding of history, I think the current situation that's been created is far more likely to it's just kicking the can down the road. That's what I think. I think that the region of Kosovo is way too important to the Serbian identity, that eventually at some point a war is gonna restart there. And honestly, speaking of the last few days, there's been a lot of activity on the Kosovo Serb border. So to be determined there. And what do you say about NATO and Putin, or Russia essentially having a veto? That's very interesting. Do you think that that's a U.S. Uh, based concern? Like the U.S. was more concerned about not having the majority say in things, or do you think that was more of a European based concern in terms of internal NATO politics?
I think it didn't get very far, and the policy. Stefano, maybe you remember better than I do. But what I recall is that the quibbles with it were across NATO. So in the United, it started out It started out, hey, that's a good, what a great idea, and then very quickly these points were raised. Why is what? So Putin's offering this up. Why and what would happen if Russia was inside NATO? That was basically it. And I think it's right. It's right that as soon as you there is a different it's a different mentality. Russia is there are certain states, there's certain countries that have this great power mentality that see themselves as almost a religious conviction that they deserve to project their power and to to have influence beyond their borders. The United States is one, China is one, Russia is one, right? Norway is a completely oil-rich state, right? It has the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, right? But no one's afraid of Norway. Norway is not invading. It's not building up an army and invading its neighbors. And attempting to spoil multinational actions elsewhere in the world. Italy is not, right? Canada is not, right? And so Russia does have it has historically, it has a personality. It is a spoiler personality. That's what it is repeatedly. It is traditionally this, and it is now. And now I think it is an interesting, Putin, by the way, is not a fool. He's, extremely smart, playing his hand, and he makes good points, right? Some of his Munich speech, what year was it? Like 2006 or 2008?
Yeah,
2008. Yeah. Was there was a lot in that speech that made sense, and a lot of things he said were right about what the United States is doing. But then you go, okay, but what if you go along with Putin? Then where do you get? And in my view, and a lot of other people, you get Russia invading other countries, its neighbors, and so I do not think that I think that we were coming to a Russian invasion of Ukraine regardless.
I agree with that entirely. Yeah.
Diana, if I can, I would post some questions because I have collected. I have one question of Zo. There is two questions that is connected, so I will post it both to you. Like if we can fastly answer to this, because we have I have collected a lot, and only to make the format as possible, less than 2 hours, as we said. So why doesn't Russia and China fully support Iran against Saudi Arabia? Since the end of the days, Saudi Arabia is a firm US ally. Arming Iran will be a game changer to counter US influence. And another one still of Zo. Another question: what are the ramifications of an economic collapse of Pakistan since they are close to default? How will China, India, Russia, and US react? So, Steve?
I was going to defer to Ian on the first question first.
Okay.
I mean, I would just say that Saudi Arabia is not the firm U.S. ally that the question implies. We're their security guarantor. That's how you would say it. But To say we're an ally would suggest that the two countries are friends, and I don't think anyone would really prescribe to that. I mean, obviously we're not friends. The current U.S. President Joe Biden and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, have a very what seems to be a very strong disdain for each other. So I mean, I think in terms of Saudi Arabia's allegiances, they're very much in play. The U.S. just went there to visit, to get something. I don't know. Some people are saying that like it was to get more oil production. It probably had a bit to do with Iran and Israel. It also probably had a bit to do with Russia and Ukraine. The only thing that came out of it was the U.S. Or Joe Biden ended up saying, we recommitted ourselves to the security of Saudi Arabia. So we went in wanting a lot of things, and then came out, in the same position we were before, basically paying for their security, which is important. I'm not going to say it's not important. Is the Persian Gulf area is like the number one choke point in the whole world for oil flow. I mean, if it's like at least I've thrown out the numbers before. I believe 21 million barrels per day of production comes out of the Strait of Hormuz, and a big part of that, over half of it, comes from Saudi Arabia. And if that were to stop, the modern world would pretty much collapse in a very short order. So it's important that there's stability in that region. As in terms of like arming Iran, can you put the question back up, Stefano?
Repeat. I didn't get Jan what you need.
Can you put the question back up?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get the wording of this right.
And the first question.
No, the first one.
Okay, sorry.
Game changer. No, I don't. I think that like Russia and China already give the support to Iran that they're willing to give, like to a certain level, and I think Iran, like in terms of like their military, like what a lot of people don't realize is that like these countries, their militaries are constrained a lot by like economic and budgetary power. Like if Iran is a pretty big nation. It's got a pretty big military. I think it's like over like somewhere in terms of like 1 million troops, but operating like lots of like heavy equipment, like advanced like 5th gen fighters or 4th plus gen fighters, and a lot of this like more expensive stuff, I think is just like kind of out of reach for Iran. And Russia and China can like give some of this stuff to Iran, and they could make use of it, but like how much of it could they operate like within like their budgetary constraints, and how much of a difference did that make? I'm not really sure. In terms of like what Iran needs, like it doesn't really need this stuff. Like look at like the Iranian Navy and like what they just put out there. They just literally like looking at the images and the videos, like this boat barely looks like it can float, but they just rigged up basically like some old cargo ship with a bunch of catapults for drone launchers, and this is their solution for an aircraft carrier, right? So like they have like these basically rusted out buckets floating around in the Persian Gulf now, full of these drones that they can use to hit American Navy assets, or oil rigs going through the Persian Gulf, whatever they need to do to shut down the Persian Gulf. And that's all they really need. They don't need fancy fighter jets for that. They don't need multi-million dollar or multi-billion dollar like frigates and destroyers and things like that. They need like cheap disposable high effect equipment, things that can like pack a punch, but if they get destroyed, it's not a problem. I wish I had an image of this thing to throw up, but those of you in the audience, just look it up. Look up Iranian drone carriers, and it's a rust bucket floating in the ocean that can do many times more damage to whatever it's going after than what it's worth. And that's, in terms of military support, Iran doesn't really need it in my view. That's all I have to say on the first question there.
Okay, about the question about Pakistan, because I know nothing about the zone. So if Steve, because I think that you are more familiar to this question.
Yeah. I just wanted to add something to what Ian said.
Okay.
And it's more of a question than a, well, it's a statement wrapped in a question, but I've wondered, all of these years I've wondered, right? Does Russia really want a another nuclear power on its, on its to its south? And I mean, my own answer to that is yes. It's played with Iran because the U.S. is an enemy of Iran, right? So it's played that game, just the way that the questioner poses, but it doesn't want Iran to have nuclear
Bombs
capability, and it went along with the 2015 nuclear control deal, right? I mean, it was going to to take all of that 20% enriched fuel and deal with that. So this is it's again one of these questions that sounds cool, but it's not valid. It's just not valid. It's just in fact, Russian interests and I think real Russian desires aligns much closer with the West than almost any of these issues. Ian, do you have anything to say about that?
I actually, it's a very interesting point, and I actually agree with a lot of that. A lot of people, they see things under the context of now, but they don't see things under the context of like the past and potentially the future. And Russia and Iran and China are all competitors. I mean, Iran and China with each other a little bit less, but Iran in Russia and China and Russia, like there's huge competition there historically, and there will be in the future. And honestly, geographically, they're both far more bigger rivals with Russia than the U.S. is. I think what you're currently seeing right now is under the global situation, this global free trade order, where the U.S. is basically the policeman of the world. We're in everyone's way, and a lot of these countries that have grievances want us out of their way. So like it seems like they're allies now. It's an alliance of convenience. The enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. But once if America say like goes into retrenchment, I mean, I don't think America is going to get defeated in a war by any of these countries. But if we go into like a retrenchment of like say non-interventionism or the words escaping me. Whatever we were before World War II.
Isolationist or
Isolationist. Yeah, if America were to turn back into an isolationist nation, we would really no longer be enemies with. I mean, maybe with China, but like with a lot of these countries, their biggest problem once we're out of the way is each other. Like China has territorial claims on the Russian Far East. Chinese nationalists don't forget that. They think about it. Um, the Caucasus is a huge flashpoint between Iran and Russia. I mean, basically, the Caucasus is a mess of a mess of borders that doesn't make any sense. That are basically trying to be manipulated from at least three different directions. You have Iran, Turkey, and Russia all trying to influence what's going on in that area. And Steve, you probably know a lot more about that than I do. I don't know much more than the fact that it's a mess and that it's those three powers that are competing there. But I think that in terms of nuclear capability, a nuclear capable Iran Under the current format of the world order, Russia doesn't want that. But under what's going on now, basically, like, a collapse of the world order, if you will, or a potential collapse of it, um, Russia is going to have to deal with it, because the alternative, like allowing Iran to make a deal, and then to get with the Americans, and then to get their oil back on the market, would be worse for Russia in the current situation. And I think they probably see the writing on the wall and think, well, like, if Iran wants one, they can make one. I think they probably could have made one anytime in the last 5 or 6 years. They've been dragging their feet because I don't think Iran wants one. I think they're just kind of using it to try to like get like a good deal with the West. Um, but I think in a world under of disorder, where like you don't have the U.S. being this global guarantor and stuff, there probably will end up being a lot more countries that decide that they're going to go it on their own, and develop their own device, and Iran will probably be one of them. Poland will probably be one of them. Germany, Japan, some of these countries. So, yeah, I think that um, right now it's not the highest on Russia's to-do list to prevent Iran from gaining access to this.
Steve, if because we forgot this question about Pakistan, if
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
answer, then I will move to fast answer, because I have collected a little bit, and so.
Okay. Yes. So yeah, just to remind, before I was based in the former Soviet Union, I was based in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and so I do follow it. Pakistan has been on the verge of economic collapse for since the 1980s. So about 40 years, and the fighting in Afghanistan has rescued Pakistan, right? Because it's been since the 1980s, right? Since the Carter, right? The latter last year of the Carter administration, then the Reagan administration, and it was the staging ground for the U.S. Opposition to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and of course we know what happened after 9/11 there. So Pakistan has been a ward of the international community for over 40 years, but yet, even though really tens of billions of dollars of economic assistance from all, right? I mean, when you were there, right, there were aid agencies from any country you could think of was there, right? And so everyone was pouring, attempting to fix Pakistan's education system, its public works, everything, soup to nuts, and it just all went down the tubes. Where all that money went, probably a lot of Swiss bank accounts, and so because. But the thing is that Pakistan is a nuclear power like India, and so no one is prepared. Okay, no one is prepared to just let Pakistan collapse. For that reason, Pakistan, the reason that Iran is even near to achieving nuclear capability is because Pakistan leaked its nuclear capability to Iran, and the same with North Korea. Pakistan leaked its nuclear capability to North Korea. So Pakistan, at numerous times in history, has behaved like a rogue country, and so this question, will Pakistan collapse, and how will the various countries react? It's not going to collapse because no one's going to let it collapse, and the reason is that no one wants a collapse in a nuclear country, and what that means for a place that already has shown that it's prepared to sell its nuclear capability to anybody.
Perfect. No, I agree. It was the same also with the memorandum, Budapest memorandum for Ukraine. I cannot like understand or think about a scenario where Ukraine has still a nuclear capability now. I think probably the special military operation war in Ukraine, and call as you want, couldn't be appeared in February. But another of our contributors, that is Alex, History Legends, is our speaker team. So, Steve, do you think it was a mistake for United States to push Russia and China as allies?
Yeah. Right. I think the way of formatting this is allowing that, right? Not taking care that didn't happen.
Okay.
Right. So that's a problem. That's right. So it contradicts best U.S. interests that China and Russia are allies. That was the right when Nixon went to China. That's what that was all about, right? That the U.S. felt that it could divide those two, the then communist world. But remember that there's been a rise of concern, right? The domestic concern in the United States about China's rise and its economic and political rise, belt and road, its technological power, and that's not just a function of Donald Trump. There really is support for that, bipartisan support. So what would you do, right, if you didn't want those two to get together? If you were opposing Russia on the basis of Crimea and then the Ukraine invasion, and you wanted to bring China, you wanted to divide those two and keep China close, how would you do that and at the same time oppose China's economic policy? That would be very, very hard. So like I personally, I'm thinking like you could try to do that. You would try and try to convince China that it was in its best interest to not align with Putin politically, while battling the United States pretty heavily, right, on the basis of tariffs, that whole economic thing. It just wouldn't work, and so the U.S. had to pick an approach, and this is the approach it picked. Ian, do you have an opinion
I
on
would
that?
just say I've thought about that several times, and I mean, like you said, it's what happened during the Nixon times is one of the reasons why we won the Cold War was the Sino-Soviet split. Ended up not only for those two countries to start fighting, but to actually pull one over into our economic sphere was like a huge factor in winning the Cold War and ultimately sending the Soviet Union down the path of bankruptcy. But I think that the only possible way, and I'm not saying that this would have worked at all, but like the path that would have set us down, flipping Russia onto the American side. The best way, I think, I don't think there's a chance of well, or not necessarily a chance. Like the main enemy here in my mind is China. They're the peer competitor. I think they're the country with the wild ideology, and I mean basically, I mean it's known as like a communist country, but I see it as more of a fascist country at this point. Honestly, there's not much communist about the way China works. I mean, it's more or less just like extremely nationalist, with state control in terms of like what they tell the business to do. That speaks fascism to me. And then of course you have like what's going on in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs and everything. It's just not. Yeah, I see China as being the main problem here. So to me, and this is just like if I were the guy like over the world pulling the strings with what to do, I would say that you would want to flip Russia over to our side rather than China, because Russia's not the true enemy. And the only way to have done that would have been something more along the lines of what Mearsheimer was suggesting, other than the current situation, and that would have been to concede or basically force the Ukrainians to concede Crimea and the Donbass to the Russians, and recognize that you can have it's Russian territory, and then make Ukraine basically the neutral space in between NATO and Russia, and leave it as like a permanent, like kind of a buffer zone in between the two. And then that would have been the best path going forward for a good relationship with Russia, in order for them to use them as an ally against China. Now, whether or not that would have actually worked or not, I'm not going to say. I personally think that Russia is the most insecure country in the world, and this is the cause of World War II. Germany was the most insecure country in the world. It had powerful enemies both to its east and to its west, and it believed throughout its history from German unification up to that point that it was always going to be in danger. It always had wide open borders, and it was always going to have to confront the enemies on both sides. So, the German plan was obviously to something more of from Napoleon's playbook, to defeat in detail, mass on one side, crush one enemy, switch to the other, crush the other enemy. It's the tactic they used in both wars. Russia is in a similar position to Germany now, but more or less mainly on their western flank, where they're just a very insecure country. They have wide open borders. They have enemies basically all the way around them, and in terms of the way that Russians see it. They think we've talked about like the victimization. They think everyone's coming after them, so they're looking to reach geographic barriers where the defense of their country is more plausible, right? Like if someone were to attack Russia with their current borders, not now when they have a powerful military, but let's say like in 20, 30 years when population collapse really sets in Russia, and they don't have anything except for the nukes on their side in terms of defense, then they would be in a lot of trouble. So I think that Russia is acting preemptively to fix their border situation and their security situation. That way they have some breathing room to deal with their internal problems that are going to come up in the next 20, 30 years. So whether or not it would have worked to concede the Donbass and the Crimea to Russia in order to bring them in as friends, I'm not sure. Honestly, that probably would have like screwed over the plan, right, for Russia. If the West and Ukraine would have actually agreed to the concessions Russia was asking for, that might have messed up their groove in the grand scheme of things. I think they knew that no one was ever going to agree to what they were asking, and they were planning on that. They were planning on a rejection. That way they would have an excuse in order to do what they're doing now. So that's the path, but I'm not sure if it would have worked.
Jan, I have three super far question about Italy. I will put fastly an answer about what do you think about the American deep state. Okay, let's say would like to see in the Italian election. Can we expect a lot of anti-Italian right-wing propaganda in American media outlets? The other one, it's like about the same things about in articles of New York Times, for instance, of upcoming month. and the last of the same viewers was about okay, let me check. But about these two, I can answer to you that the Italian public, let's say, doesn't give no attention, nothing at all to the international news. Like actually, the internal policy it's concentrated mainly about Northern Africa immigration, about the real state of economy. You have to think that it's a very strange moment in Italy, because Italy is the biggest growing economy in the European Union. I think it's probably the first and last time in the next 10 years. But Germany is in stagnation. Italy it's plus 4%. So we are used to like an increase of the GDP plus 1, plus 2, plus 1 point something. But it's the economy. It's really going pretty well. We will have probably the first stable government in the last 10 years, because there will be a big majority. So I don't think that the international news can change nothing about the electoral results. At the moment, the system it's based by two systems. We have a majority uninominal system for some seats and a proportional system for others. So it's very complicated to understand how much seats any party will have, but there is a pretty majority for sure for the center right, about 6-7 points, 10 points in the polls. So let's see what will happen. About this is an affirmation: Russia plus Europe is a potential superpower if they can figure out their differences. But Russia is a Western power; it's closer to Europe than Asia. If I can pass the stand to Steve, I can say to the public that in the Russian news, I think at least last 10 years, they were debating, I don't know if it's like fake or only gossip, to move technically the administrative capital of Russia to east, not to Moscow. You can find it. There is a lot of rumors about it. Probably because they wanted to have more connection to Asia than to Europe, some part of the political elite in Russia. But if you check about the population, Ian can confirm it, 75% of Russian lives before the Urals. So the most part of population, it's European, it's not Asians.
Right.
So
right,
Steve,
right.
If you can give your point of view about this.
Wait. So the question is what?
The question is if the Russian Federation and Europe together could be a superpower. Let's say in a form that we can imagine Russia full of commodities and Europe with manpower and the industries. Let's say like this.
Yes. So in principle, this is possible, but how in practice do you recover from Ukraine? And so absolutely, that would have been a superb configuration and economic and resource alliance. Figuring out how they could work together. But I'm interested in Ian's view on this too. But it seems to me that ship has sailed. I don't see how, even after Putin is gone, Putinism is still there. It's like Trump, right? You lose Trump, but the Trumpism is still there. Ian, do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, I think the basis of this is kind of referring to Mackinder's heartland theory. Like, if obviously, the Eurasia is the pivot point, and then Europe is like the primary. I guess you could say it's the golden apple in terms of land quality, population, and it is certainly educated workforce. The industrial capabilities of Europe, and then of course, Russia has the raw resources that it needs. So a super state between Europe and Russia, would have the capability to challenge anyone on the world scene, right? And it's been the center of British geopolitics, and then that geopolitics was then inherited by the U.S. Um, on our entrance into World War One. That was basically the talking point, right? It was you have the British coming to us telling us the dangers of allowing Germany to keep growing in power, because in Germany, if they become the dominant power in Europe, they can become the dominant power in Eurasia. Then they can pool enough resources together to challenge either the British or the U.S. Navy on the seas, which are traditionally what you would considered to be maritime powers. So yeah, I mean, there is obviously big possibility for a superpower there. Like what Steve said, it's in the current format with what's going on in Ukraine. It's tough to see that. However, the path would be, um, if this situation, especially I mean, the biggest danger for the West is the economic situation, and I think that I think it's very underestimated by our current Western leaders, right? Like they have an idea of what they need to do in terms of like internationally, like international politics, and isolating Russia, and of course you've seen everything that's been going on. But they've discounted, or they vastly underestimated the effect of these things on their own domestic economies, and that will come back to bite hard. I mean, it's already coming back to bite hard, but like when all these countries, it might not be in the next election, but maybe even in the next election after that, a lot of these populations are going to start turning on their current, I guess you could say, like liberal internationalist governments. Whether you lean to one side or not, I don't really care. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying like most European governments, and then including the American government, prescribe to this um, liberal international order, and it seems like on the face of it, at least to the populations, and this is kind of what Russia's trying to sell in their information game, that the decisions that these countries are making are not in the best interests of their own population. They are making decisions on behalf of the international world order. Now, these countries, I believe, are making the assessment that the international world order is what's best for their country. So, like, they're sacrificing short-term things domestically for long-term things, right? By going with going with America and going with the global uh, free trade order and things like that. But I think that doesn't really matter in terms of like your average voter. Your average voter doesn't have time to like look deep into politics and deep into history and philosophy on some of these things. They care about, how much does it cost for me to drive to work every day? Like, how much does it cost to feed my family? Am I struggling with rent? And ultimately, you're going to have a lot of people in America, in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and a lot of these countries that have traditionally, left-leaning governments that are signed up to this international thing. And there's a good chance that at least some of them are going to start flipping to the right, or to the like more of a Trumpian type right, where it like a nationalist right, not necessarily like a fascist one. I hope not. But in that path, I mean, and it really depends on like the type of like right wing governments that gets elected. Because if it's your traditional like neoconservative governments, then not much is going to change. I mean, I think in America especially, there's not much difference in terms of international politics if you were to compare like Nancy Pelosi to Mitch McConnell. I mean, like they're all like basically on board with the same direction with international politics. They just disagree domestically. But if you get like Trump-like figures in some of these countries that are like, we're going to go it our own, we're going to, you know, like separate from NATO. I mean, there's some sentiment in Germany and in Italy, and definitely in the U.S. for what's going on with Russia, you know, and that they're trying to ignore it and act like it's not there, but it's there. There's some people that are like, you know, especially in America, that are like, why the hell are we sanctioning, you know, oil and gas if it's sending up our gas prices? You know, there's a lot of people in America and in some of these Western countries that care more about their wallet than they do Ukraine, and you know, that might seem like a bad thing, but like your average person cares more about their own life than they do what's going on in international politics, you know. So
Yeah, sorry,
that,
sorry to interrupt you because Steve has to go in a
okay.
while. So I have like the super last two fast questions for you. When we can finish with Jan with the last question for the public. We don't want to take your time anymore. So one is from me. I will take it at the end because for me it's very important your point of view about Putin Labyrinth. So you will see it. About this one, that is about it's Alexa, our speaker from History Legends. What countries do you consider the worst allies of the United States, both militarily and economically?
Yeah, well, I think we've named one. Pakistan is a very problematic country and has been. You know, it's very difficult to work with Pakistan. I love Pakistan, by the way. I mean, I lived there, and I traveled there for, you know, since 1989, right? So you know, but it is, you know, it's a puzzle. What you know, you know, in the end, you can help a country, but it needs to help itself, and so that's the problem there. And Turkey, right? So Turkey is, you know, a super problematic ally, and you know, this was a problem in Middle East policy, and it's also been a problem with Ukraine policy. By the way, Turkey was a very strong, you know, super strong and not problematic ally when it came to the first decade after the Soviet breakup, right? I mean, Baku-Ceyhan pipeline worked because Turkey was like, Turkey led that, right? So, I mean, the U.S. came in, but the U.S. came in and backed Turkey on that, and that, you know, that was a different era. But under Erdogan, it's been a different story.
Perfect. So last question, and we will left you, and we will finish the stream with Rihanna. So this is one question that I wanted to give to a lot of our viewers, because a lot of time I took my point of view because I went in Russia for the last 10 years. I lived in Russia at least 1 month and a half, 2 every years. I have a lot of connection there and whatever, and also with a lot of people from former Soviet Union, as you. So, but in Putin Labyrinth, it was very interesting, like this different point of view of value of life. And I want to be more clear. Like my point of view is like yours. It's not about that the value of life is less in Russia than in Europe or in Western countries. It's how is the perception of this in the society. If you can explain better, as you did in the book, what does it mean, this different way of thinking?
Yeah, it's do you mean, Stefano? Do you mean the value of life in these confrontations? Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So so this is right through again. It's a historical reference, and it goes to today. It's for the last 500 years, and the best example of this was World War II, where the Soviet Union through its multitudes of men into the conflict, and lost like 20 million people in that war. If I can, I'm a bit caught surprised by the question. The Russian people have shown a willingness to suffer and to absorb suffering, to absorb death of its people in wars, in confrontations at a much greater level than the West has. And it's like you can Russian leaders can rely on this willingness, on this preparation for people to die, right? In for example, today in Ukraine, than Western countries have shown. And where does that come from? Why is that the case? I'll leave that to anthropologists, to sociologists, but it's just true, right? It's a repeated thing, through our lifetimes, through historical memory, meaning because we all read about the 20th century, the two world wars, and the Soviet collapse, and the time since, and this has been the case. Stefano, does that kind of get to where you wanted to go? Yeah,
it was perfect. So thank you for your answer, and thank you for your time. I suggest to all the viewers, like the book Valor of the Glory. It's very interesting because it's an incredible story that is made directly from Steve LeVine on site of what will happen during before and just during and after the Soviet collapse, during let's say in the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. It's very interesting because it's very, very connected to what is happening now, to the geopolitics of the Caucasus and the Caspian Sea, and about what will happen with the connection with Southern Europe, and also to the connection also with the accessibility of the Nord Stream or not. So, Steve, thank you for your time. I hope that we can host you in Italy in our geopolitical school. That will be probably in March. So I will send you the invitation. And nothing. Still, thank you. We will finish with a question and answer with Ian. And see you soon in Italy.
Okay. Thanks, Stefano. Thanks, Ian. I really enjoyed the chat.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye then. Bye.
So, Ian, let's go to the questions, just to stay in not a very long stream, but we received a lot of questions. So, one that is very connected to the situation, so we will see about Eastern Dalmatia. It's a typical example that it's similar to the Ukrainian war, because we will see in another time with Ian. But I found a lot of historical sources that were talking about the Donbass and Crimea border still from 1990, 1991. The aides of Gorbachev said to Kravchuk, the Ukrainian prime minister at that time, that if Ukraine will make the agreement and the referendum of independence from Soviet Union, Donbass and Crimea will return back to Russian Federation. So it's very interesting that these issues it's not from now, it's 40 years ago. This issue about Eastern Dalmatia, it's before Second World War. Historically, we are a part of Venetian Republic. It's interesting because there is a lot of Italian-speaking there people. A lot of them is with, let's say, roots in Italy. But the most part of them was connected culturally because they watch Italian television. There is a lot of Italian students there. I think there is no chance we don't have a nationalist that want to make any troubles about these things. So nothing connected to Eastern Dalmatia in actual
So
geopolitics.
you're referring Dalmatia is the southern regions of Croatia now, correct?
It's coastal because you have Eastern Dalmatia, it's like the coastal part, and you have like historically one part of the coastal part of Slovenia and Croatia was Italy.
Italian, yeah.
Before
So like
was
the port,
Republic of
the
Venice.
port of Split, and then there's another big seaport there. Is it is Zagreb,
If
right?
you go down, like you have, not Zagreb, it's inside, but you have like, for example, Capodistria Koper, that is in Slovenia, was Italian. Like Pola was Italian. Everything on the
Dubrovnik?
coast.
It was Dubrovnik Italian.
I think we have a different name. Yes, everything that it's going to Qatar. So if you go to Montenegro, all the coasts of former Yugoslavia was Republic of Venice. Then only one part. Then after the Second World War was captured by Tito and made into Yugoslavia. But there is an Italian party that represents the Italian minority in the region, and so there is one seat dedicated to the Italian in the Croatian parliament. So no troubles. There is a very peaceful situation with Croatia, Slovenia, and whatever. But I think it's a similar case to Ukraine. It's more similar South Tyrol in Italy because we have this situation of autonomy and so about this one that I will give to Jan, but I will answer also. What is the future of US-EU relations in light of the Ukrainian crisis if it were be viewed from a position of US, NATO, undermining US energy security?
One second. I'm trying to understand.
From Europe, yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that the undermining of EU energy security is intentional. I just think it was short-sighted. So I mean, so relations between the U.S. and EU very like this goes back to what I was saying about it depends on the elections coming up, because the relations between EU and US technocrats is very good. I mean, this is the conversation that you have in the news shortly after the war and all the way up to now, that like, oh, the West is united, or NATO's never been more united. Like, they've said it so many times, it makes you feel like it's not so united. Like, why do you have to say it so much type situation? But I think the technocrats and the politicians are very much united because they all see it the same way. But this comes back to the elections. When the elections come around and some of these governments start flipping, I mean, like from what you were saying, Stefano, I get the feeling you were saying it's possible that Italy gets a right-leaning government.
No, it's not possible. Let's say that it's pretty sure because we have, if nothing will change, we have let's say that actually the poll said that the two most voted in the polls parties are Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, that
Brothers
it's like
of Italy.
a right party.
That's not
It's
a center
like,
right. It's a right, right?
it's right. It's
right.
not we don't have to like far right, but it's like it's right party. It's conservative right, and it has over 20% of votes. And the Democrats Party, that in Italy it's like let's say center left, is the second party. It's like it's too close to call who is the first, who is the second, but the most difference will be made by the alliance. The alliance of center-right has about 45-46%, but it's not the majority. But the alliance of center-left, it's about 33%. The difference, it's like Five-Star Movement, that at the moment it's out of the alliance because they say that they will do the third poll. But in this situation, center-right, it's pretty sure to win.
Right.
If nothing will change. The only problem that we will have in Italy, I think that the Italian election will be very interesting for all the equilibrium in the European Union, because at the moment we have, let's say, a center government in France, a center left in Germany, and in Italy, if we will have a right, the problem is the first party. The first party will be right, not center right. So it's the first time, I think, from 1945. So it's but the first thing that the leader of this party, that is a woman, Giorgia Meloni, said is that we are Atlantist, so pro NATO. So it's only to show that because there was in the past some connection with Russia. There was some connection, for example, of Lega Nord with United Russia. There was an agreement between the two parties for cooperate. So, as some viewers said before, there will be a lot of, let's say, manipulation of the news about, let's say, Russia's intervention in the Italian selection. I think that people doesn't give a shit about the intervention. The issues in Italy election, it's very practical. Immigration, work, economy. If you will see, I can send the let's say the timeline of news in TV. Ukraine, that was for 3 months first news, now it's fourth or fifth. So the level of attention in Italy about also the war, it's very low at the moment. So
well, I think so. That's exactly my point. I think that with some of these elections that are coming up in Europe, it depends on which way they go. But I don't think that you'll get any particular government that comes into power in the EU that will be hostile towards the U.S. in the situation that's been created. I think that you'll get governments that want to reverse the situation, and then you will have a U.S. that doesn't want to reverse the situation and starts to, maybe make threats, maybe make suggestions, and then that's where there could possibly be some kind of breakdown in relationship between the U.S. and EU, but not a complete breakdown. I think just a degrading is a better word.
Okay, I will put fast question and answer because I received a lot, so we can stay at least under the 2 hour and a half bit to maintain the streams as more watchable as possible. JMB Passa tried to send many questions, but it was late. I'm collecting now. So, is it imperative that Russia lose this war or that Putin will be removed? Otherwise, the world will not be a safe place. Isn't the Putin is evil argument? The idea outcome is for Russia to break up. Let me answer to you, and then Ian. I think, as we already repeat in many streams, this is a little bit a Western point of view about Putin, because also I don't agree with this point of view. I love Russia. Maybe I'm not agree with Russian government every time, but nobody knows what will happen after Putin. Maybe it will be worse for Westerners. So it's not a biblical truth that after Putin it will be a better government in Russia. It's very
Yeah.
difficult issue about it.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
yeah,
this is definitely the argument. I mean, I think that they've got it down pretty good. I mean, not totally to the extent, like, if you were to ask like a US diplomat, if you were to ask them this question, that they would say no, this is not the goal, but it definitely seemed like this was the goal early on. I would say it's not a Putin thing, like what you're saying, Stefano. Like, if not Putin, it would be someone else. It's Russia, the nation of Russia. This war is in their interest. Whether or not the West admits that it's in their interest, the West keeps saying that this is a bad miscalculation on the Russians' part. They see it as an existential crisis that like, you going to war in Ukraine is worth all the economic troubles. So that should tell you how important it is to them. So it's like their biggest thing. The Ukraine is like the biggest problem for Russia right now. The outcome of Russia breaking up, like if say Russia were to lose the war, and then go into chaos and civil war, and you say if you get all these separatist enclaves, like Tatarstan and Bakuristan, and the Siberian territories, if they were to break apart, I mean, frankly, it would be an absolute disaster. You would probably end up quadrupling the number of countries worldwide that have nukes, and all these ex Russian countries would be like near the top of the list in terms of like the number of nuclear weapons they have, obviously below the US, but probably above China. Each one of them, I mean, they have their nukes pretty well dispersed throughout the country, and they would be under the control of supposedly warlords, at that point. So the breakup of Russia would be an absolute catastrophe, not just for Russia, but for the West as well, because then you would, I mean, vastly increases the chances of something happening with one of these weapons.
yeah, and if I can like make an agreement with you, and but like let's say to be agree as more as I can, I think that the U.S. foreign policy during the collapse of Soviet Union was completely against the collapse of Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Because it was much better to deal with one let's say entity, also if it was the only other superpower, than to, I don't know, many small former Soviet republics with a lot of different issues and whatever, and with nuclear warheads. So I agree with you. This question is only for you because I don't know nothing and it's your field. So what are China democrats going to do their multipolar or emerging leadership aspiration?
So I mean, this is an interesting thing to bring up in terms of China. China is a peer competitor to the U.S. right now, right? And they have a lot of military power and capabilities right now, right? But in terms of demographics, China is a nation in decline. They're actually probably the nation in the world in the fastest state of decline out of any other nation. So they had a quick rise, and they're probably going to have an even quicker fall in terms of demographics, and which affects everything. I mean, demographics. I mean, in terms of military, it affects manpower. It affects, of course, it affects volunteers. It affects conscripts. In terms of economic power, and it affects virtually everything: financing, production, stability. China is actually the fastest aging country in the world right now. It's way up there. So the window for China to act on their aspirations is very short. It's probably somewhere in between 5 and 10 years. It might even be shorter than that. So like, that's probably what makes China so dangerous. Can you put the question back up? I think in terms of their aspirations, if they want to expand China, like capture Taiwan, reclaim some of these territories, the time for it's now. It's not in 10 years. It's not in 15 years. It might be in 3 years or 5 years, but this is the window for them. So, yeah, demographically speaking, it's a bad situation. It's created a China that could act very irrationally, and I mean, it could destabilize a lot. If it does decide to go through with what we think its aspirations are.
Okay, so last questions and we will close. So these are very complicated, but let's see what will manage to this question. Why does the Washington political establishment from both political parties accept that we are in a multipolar world? Why are still trying to maintain unipolarity at all costs?
Oh, great question. Actually, I heard someone address this in terms of not in terms of neocons and neoliberals. I might have heard this from the Duran or Alexander Mercurius, but what they were saying was is these neocons and neoliberals, they are what they are. Like, this is the ideology that they follow. They've been elected into office, and as long as they're there, they're going to do what they believe, and what their purpose and the reason why they got elected. They're gonna follow that path. And if they got elected in order to maintain this position, then while they're in office, they're gonna try everything they can to help the U.S. maintain this position. So if their goal, and if they are elected to, lead the U.S. through a unipolar world, and if the world is changing, they're going to try everything they can to stop it, up to the point that they get kicked out of office. And generally that's how politics works. Politicians almost never, flip, in office and decide, like, me as a person, like say I am, Paul Ryan, or like some politician that's like up there, and all of a sudden, I've seen some facts that changed my mind, and I see taxes being completely different now. I can't just go out there and say, oh, I'm a Democrat now, I'm going to change my whole tax policy. Like, that's just not how it works. These guys, they have an idea of what they want to do going into office. They run on that idea. They get elected by people that have that same idea, and they implement, and they do everything they can to hold the line on that idea until the day that the majority of the population that elects them doesn't see it that way, and they kick them out of office. So, like, political change doesn't come from political leaders changing. It comes from a change of the political leaders. I hope that makes sense.
I agree with you. Only about James Clash, still about Eastern Dalmatia. We will talk. I think that we will. I will try to have some speaker about it because it's very interesting. Having ethnic exclaves in other countries and an issue that we start to get oppressed, like in Ukraine. So the Italian knowledge isn't great. Just for you to understand, we had an exile of this population that it's calculated in about 250 or between 250 and 350,000 people. So there was a huge problem in this after the Second World War. And the people who declined the offer to go away from their houses were killed in, it's called karstic foibs, that is holes in the ground. And the calculation of the death, it's called foib massacres. It's between 5,000 and 10,000 people killed. Nobody knows the real numbers because they were killed alive. They'd have to jump into these holes. So I think that if you look at the histories of the conflict, you have the same problems, but we solve it. with peace agreement. We stay together. There is no, let's say, a lot of people, a huge minority that say, "Oh, this lands is Italy. We will take it back." No, we go for tourism. We exchange economies. It's a different point of view of the situation. So it was for Steve, but I will put to Jan, and then we will take the last question, and it's finished. What do you think Russia should have done differently in handling the Ukraine crisis since 2014?
I mean, I thought about this a lot. Honestly, I think it would have been best for Russia in terms of like if they wanted a swift war and a quick victory, if Russia would have done what they're doing now in 2014 and annexed Ukraine outright. Ukraine was very, very weak in 2014, and the Russia of today could have easily done that. But the only thing wrong with that is Russia was also very weak in 2014. Financially, they were very weak, and militarily, I'm not going to say they were very weak, but they're certainly much stronger now than they were, and I mean, if you think people, there's like a lot of memes out there about the Russian military and their capabilities now. Like everyone's saying, "Oh, this is the second strongest army in the world." It's like, well, imagine how those opinions would be if this would have happened in 2014. Um, I think, yeah, I think it would have been better if they could have done what they're doing now in 2014. They would have probably easily swept the Ukrainians aside. A lot of the Ukrainian military probably, I mean, a lot of them did actually, but a lot more of them might have even defected. Um, to the Russian side because they were still part of that Soviet system and a lot, looking into like the history of like what happened in Maidan and stuff. The military didn't really know what to do in a situation, and they were kind of in disarray. Like the fighting in Donbass, like a big part of it had to be picked up by these nationalist battalions, and that's ultimately what saved Ukraine. I mean, still even with um, the limited effort from Russia, there was a point where the Donbass war was not looking good for Ukraine at all. So, um, yeah, I think Russia, by waiting to now, there's obviously some risks that came with that in terms of like time frame. Like we've talked a lot about demographics. Like Russia is certainly like far more pressed for time now demographically than it was in 2014. But I do think the army is much stronger, and despite all those memes and like what the doubts that are out there that Russia is the second most powerful military in the world, I definitely agree with that. And the main reason I agree with that is obviously equipment, but military experience is the one thing that's really, really, really underestimated. Like the number of men you have in your serving force that have been shot at is the biggest difference maker. Like guys that know what to do in combat, that aren't going to turn and run at the first artillery barrage. Guys that can hold the units together on the ground level. That's, I mean, it's the main reason why the U.S. is considered to be the preemptive military power in the world, right? Is because we've constantly been at war over the last 20 years, and while we're not really at war with any like real like near peer competitors, I see a lot of people mentioning that in the comments. That's true. So I mean, I guess the argument is like on a general staff level, the U.S. might not have the best idea of what to do in a conflict against, like, say, Russia or China or a country like that. I think they probably do, but at a soldier level, like, it doesn't matter if you're getting shot at by a Taliban guy with an AK or a Russian soldier with an AK, just with a little bit better equipment. I mean, the Russian soldier is going to be more effective, but getting shot at's getting shot at, and that's that's the big difference maker in combat, right? And Russia has a good number of soldiers that have seen a lot of combat in the time between 2014 and now, and through that entire time they were rotating thousands and thousands of soldiers through Syria. At one point, I mean, they had probably like 60,000 troops in Syria. It wasn't the same force that was there the whole time. I assume the greater part of this, 300,000 to 400,000 strong force that they have, this professional force, has seen action. I mean, they've all obviously seen action now, but a lot of them saw action in Syria.
So let's move to I have one first question about Italian politics, but I will answer fastly, and the last one for you. And when we close, it's already 2 hours and a half. So, what role it's Mario Draghi with 1G playing in Italian politics now? Actually, it's still acting as prime minister, because in Italy now we have the chambers are closed and dismissed. So the parliament and the Senate is not working, but the government is still acting till the new election. So Draghi is still the prime minister to do only administrative acts. So there is no political act, but only administrative for at least 1 month and a half till the new government, because the main thing that you have to know that Italian is not a presidential republic, but it's parliamentary. So we will elect with parliamentary. Let's see what will happen if they have the numbers to make a government, and then after it will be elected the government. So till the new government will be elected, Draghi it will still in acting as prime minister. Last question, and we close it. So how dangerous is communist China, anti-Western, anti-European ideology for US and Europe? It seems to be increasingly stirring up people in the global South against Europeans.
I honestly, I can't really speak to the global South, but I can, I mean, communist anti-Western ideology, I imagine, is pretty widespread throughout American and European media. I think a lot of this stuff, a lot of the leftist ideology in the U.S. especially. I'm not gonna say it's like straight up Chinese propaganda, but they don't hesitate in giving it a boost. It definitely helps them out, and like some of the ideas that are being thrown out there are definitely rooted in communism. I think that's pretty clear. I mean, the biggest thing to me with China is like, I truly do see it as a fascist country. Like they masquerading as communist, like they're running a system very, very similar to what Germany had, like in like 1936. Like they have these private enterprises that do what the government tells them to do. So it's like semi-social. I mean, yeah, I mean, China is a big threat. I don't know how to speak to the global South, but I do want to say that I do think it's kind of troubling with not necessarily the position India has taken, but the lack of support that the U.S. has managed to gain from India for like some of these anti-Russian sanctions and stuff like that. It seems like the U.S. is like pushing India away, which gives China a bit of an opportunity, but I'm not sure if they'll like be able to capitalize on it or not.
Perfect. So thank you for your last answer. Thank you to Steve for this session, and we will update you for the next streams. If you like the streams, put a like on the video, and thank you for the attention, and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.